Do you get hung up on how to color really intricate stamp sets? I have some techniques to share with you today, and I'm creating 4 cards with the Simon Says Stamp Foxglove stamp set. Hey guys, it's Amber from NotableInk.com, and today I'm participating in the Simon Says STAMPtember blog party. So if you're not familiar with STAMPtember, it is a month-long party. Simon has their huge release, but they also collaborate with some of your favorite stamp companies. So I'll talk more about STAMPtember and a giveaway later on in the video. What I have here is a 5x7 gel plate, and I have it adhered to a stamp mount. So I will have all of the specific products that I use in the description down below, as well as a link to the Simon release. So be sure to check those out. Again, those are in the description down below. I'm using a 6-inch brayer to go ahead and spread out this paint. The green paint you see on the bottom is a flat acrylic paint, so it's a matte finish. The paint on the top was a metallic champagne paint, and that is a semi-transparent paint, so you can see through that one a little bit more than the flat paint, which is more opaque. I like to use different types of paint just to get a bit of a different look. This particular metallic paint is very subtle. It's not really in your face. It's not going to be super bright or super reflective in the light. It's a little more subtle than some of your other metallic paints, which I like quite a bit. It's going to give me a great backdrop for a background. I put a 4 1/4 by 5.5 piece of Neenah Classic Crest Solar White 80-pound cardstock down, and I put a piece of deli paper over top of that just so that I could get that all smoothed down. And here's the background. So I didn't use any stencils. You can see that I had a little bit of cobalt paint left over on the gel press, and that's transferred to this background, which I love. I love to leave any leftover paint on the gel press so that I can pick it up in the other prints that I do. It just adds a little more interest. I'm going to use the Foxglove stamp, and I've inked it up with Pumice Stone Distress Oxide ink. I'm going to wipe some of that off because I want to add a little more variation. You can see that this is a really light look, and so I'm going to add some color variation by adding Altenew Enchanted Gold, and this is a pigment ink. Now the gold is going to be really subtle. You could also use a darker gray, or you could use a pink color, a violet color. You can kind of go as vibrant or as subtle as you want. I just wanted a touch of color variation, and you can see that it warmed up those blooms just a little bit, which is what I was going for. I still wanted to keep the overall image pretty subtle. So here I have VersaFine Clair, and this is in Morning Mist. Now this is a cooler gray than the Pumice Stone, and it's definitely darker. I wanted to make sure that you could actually read the sentiment. And so if you remember, we put acrylic paint on top of the Neenah Classic Crest Solar White. The VersaFine Clair is a pigment ink, and so it's going to sit on top of the surface of the paper, and because I have acrylic paint on there, it's not going to absorb into the cardstock like it would typically with just your plain Neenah Classic Crest Solar White. So as you're using your inks and you're using different techniques, those are some of the things that you'll start to see. Here I've pulled out my Caran d'Ache Neocolor 2 crayons, and these are water-soluble crayons. So you can use these like watercolor. These are great for mixed media. Now you can see that I'm painting directly on this card front, and I skipped through a lot of it because I'm really just filling it in, and then I'll show you some of the shadowing. But if it's something repetitive, I went ahead and edited it out so that you don't have to watch a really long video. You kind of get the gist. I just filled them in with a little bit of the purple. So I'm going to go in and add some shadows with that darker fuchsia, and I'll continue to darken this up. Now normally I wouldn't watercolor on Neenah Classic Crest Solar White. It's a regular standard cardstock. It's heavyweight, but it's not meant to absorb a lot of water. But you can see I'm not using very much water. There's very little water on my brush. The Neocolor crayons melt so easily that it's super easy to do this. But the other reason I'm able to do this again on the Neenah Classic Crest Solar White is because I have that layer of acrylic paint on top. So it's going to make the cardstock a little more hardy. It's also going to change the way your Neocolor crayons interact with the surface. It's going to kind of sit on top like the pigment ink did. Here I've mixed burnt sienna and Payne's gray to create a shadow color. I wanted kind of like a dusky purple. And so you can see those mixed together beautifully. I'm just adding a touch of water to this. And now the stem and the leaf is looking pretty flat. I've got lots of dimension to my flowers. And so I've decided to bring that shadow color into the stem and the leaf as well. This is really simple coloring. I encourage you to be loose with it. It's okay if you go outside the lines. There's so much detail in this stamp. Just use that as a skeleton. And I think that this distressed and vintage looking card really lends itself well to these highly detailed stamps. I pulled out the other greenery image from the stamp set, and I'm going to stamp a few of those in the pumice stone. And this will create kind of a ghostly kind of pattern, and I wanted it to be a little darker, so I will stamp these a few times. And then I go in with the Morning Mist, the VersaFine Clair ink, and I just feel like I totally overdid it, you guys. It just got crazy. There's so much foliage there. I felt like it's a little too much, but so feel free to dial it back on your foliage. For the next card, I decided to use the VersaFine Clair and go ahead and stamp the image directly onto the card panel. And this time I will gel print on top of the stamped image. So we're still going for that vintage look. I decided to go with the Morning Mist, which is kind of like a medium gray. And I'm going to use the same colors because I wanted you to see the difference between gel printing your background and stamping over top of it, and then printing your stamped image and gel printing on top of your stamped image. Both of them are going to create a vintage kind of look. Now, one of the things that's important is, again, the champagne acrylic paint that I used is semi-transparent. Here I have just a piece of packaging that I got in, I don't know, something I got from Amazon, and I'm just pressing that onto the surface because I love the pattern of it. It's just a really organic pattern. I'll go ahead and use that deli paper again to press the cardstock down, and I'm gel printing just directly onto that stamped image. What it's going to do is add that texture over top of the stamped image. You can see I have a touch of pink on the blooms. I just put a tiny bit of pink paint on my finger and put it directly onto the gel plate. Sorry I didn't have that in the video, but just the tiniest bit of paint. And I kind of just finger painted it onto the gel plate. And then when I pulled my print, those other two colors pulled up that dried up pink that was already on there. I love the texture of this card, and again, because we've printed over our stamped image, it gives it that beautiful vintage look. Now, one thing you want to avoid for this technique is using completely opaque paint, because then it'll just completely cover your image. The other card you see in the background is with some purple metallic paint and that same green on the bottom, and that time I stamped with black ink. Switching gears for the next card, I decided I wanted to do almost like a chalkboard type look to this, so like a blackboard. And so I'm going to start with a teal color because I didn't want it to just be white in the background. I thought it would be a little more fun to have teal in the background. I'm using that same packaging for texture, and I'll go ahead and pull the print using the deli paper to make sure that my cardstock is pressed down firmly. So instead of stamping the image on the cardstock, this time we're going to do a lift technique. So I'm going to take black acrylic paint and put that onto the gel press. I'll go ahead and spread that out like we normally do, and then I'll let it dry just a little bit. So you can see it's a super thin layer. In fact, it's kind of patchy. It's not totally solid layer of paint. And I'm going to use the stamp to lift ink off. So I'm just walking my fingers over the stamp to make sure that I've pressed down all of the areas. Now, of course, you could totally put this stamp on a stamp block as well. You don't have to use your fingers to do this. It'd be just as easy to put it on a stamp block. So as I'm putting the cardstock on, I'm looking at the stem and deciding where I want that to fall on the cardstock, not realizing that the top of the card is hanging off of the gel plate. So I'm going to have this white band at the top. And so I'll just trim this one down a little bit because I didn't want that strip across the top there. So this is a totally different look, right? Super bold. It's very distressed looking, looks like a chalkboard, but you've got that kind of pop of teal, which is fun. I think really bright colors would look well with this, you know, maybe like a bright fuchsia. So you can get a lot of really interesting looks with this. Now, to add the foliage onto this card, I decided, since it's a black background, to do some white heat embossing. So I have the WOW Opaque Bright White Superfine embossing powder here, and I've stamped the image with clear embossing ink, and I'll go ahead and heat set that. I'm only going to show you one little bundle of foliage. I won't show you all of them because it's super repetitive. I'll go ahead, since I had to trim this down, I'll go ahead and adhere this to, you can adhere it to a card base, directly to your card base. I don't put my card bases on until I'm ready to send the card because I find them easier to store that way, and definitely easier for me to take the photos. So I just put it onto a card panel. So it's A2 size, 4 1/4 by 5 1/2. And so here you can see the difference. Now, when you do a lift technique, you're going to get a mirror image. So you can see one is pointing to the left and the other one is pointing to the right for the mirror image. So to do the opposite of this, I've gone ahead and printed this or stamped it in black ink, and I used a black pigment ink, the Altenew Obsidian ink. I'm going to grab that same packaging, add some texture, and again, this is a semi-opaque ink. There I was checking the texture. It seemed like a little bit much, like there was still a lot of acrylic paint on there. So I'm just going to use my microfiber cloth to take some more of that off. Now this paint is dry. It's a super thin layer and it's dry. So I need to re-wet this paint in order to pull the print. If I tried to pull it while the paint was dry, nothing would happen. It wouldn't pull off any paint. So I added that champagne, which was semi-transparent. And now I'll be able to pull my print and it won't completely obscure the teal that I had there. I didn't want to change the color of that teal paint. So this is looking even more distressed because we've got some teal and champagne over top of the stamped image. And I added a few sentiments from the set. Here are some of the finished cards. I hope you guys enjoyed these projects today and don't feel as intimidated by super intricate stamp sets and, you know, how do you color them? What do you do? Super easy to just add that color with your gel print, whether it's to the background or directly over the stamp. Both of them work just as well. As promised, here's a coupon code for a free gift for you for the STAMPtember party, and be sure to use the links in the description down below to head on over to all of the products from the STAMPtember line. Thanks so much for joining me today, and I'll see you soon with more inspiration.